tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
Well, anyone who's been following the descent of Canada's economic situation over the last 8 years or so has no doubt missed the glory days of Canada's economy when we had the gentleman who's sitting next to me at the helm, former Finance Minister Joe Oliver, who's also become a tremendous Financial Post columnist on occasion, a National Post columnist in his post-political life. Joe, it's good to have you back on the show. Thank you.
To be on the show with you.
I could just get you to talk into your mic there.
Great
There we go.
There we go. Well, this isn't my first rodeo, so I should know.
I was going to say, what he has in financial acumen, he lacks in audio visual capabilities, but we'll make it work here.
Okay.
Let's just talk in general about the forecasting here, because this is a forward-looking event, a lot of optimism about the possibility of replacing Justin Trudeau's government. If you were a finance minister coming into this, how would you even begin? Because the Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre have talked about balancing budgets, lowering government spending, but it takes a lot of time to correct the problem before you can do what you want, I would imagine.
Yes, well, it does, and that's why you can't say we're going to balance the budget next year. That would be draconian and unjustified. However, you have to set a target, a realistic target. Hopefully, it would be in the first term of government. Let's say within 4 years. But I haven't, delved into all the numbers, some of which are not necessarily fully disclosed, shall we say. But you have to have a target, a realistic target, and start moving to it, towards it. What you have to do is stop the profligate spending. That's absolutely crucial, and then focus on issues which will enhance productivity, because that's been a disaster for Canada. Basically, GDP per capita, which measures personal prosperity, has been essentially flat for during the whole Trudeau government, and that's what people, of course, feel. They feel the higher prices and the fact that they're not keeping up in terms of their personal salaries. And the OECD has projected that Canada will be the worst among the 38 wealthy countries in the world over the next 20 years and then 40 years. So we have to do something about that, and there are a variety of ways to do it. I'd say one critical element is start developing our natural resources and start exporting them to overseas markets, which not only will create an enormous amount of revenue, employ people, increase national security, and also help our allies. Then we have to look at the tax system to make sure it's efficient, that it isn't excessive, that it encourages entrepreneurship and allows an affordable life for Canadians. Focus on issues of science and technology to increase productivity that way. But we've got to get more capital coming into the country. We have a capital flight problem, the precise opposite of what we want. It's not that Canadian workers are lazy or incompetent, quite to the contrary. But if so little money is being spent to enhance technology and they're having to work harder than the Americans are, and therefore they're less productive. Not because, as I say, they work less hard, but because they just don't have the materials to work with, which would make them more efficient.
So one of the challenges, and we saw this especially during the Conservative leadership race, Pierre Poilievre put a fair bit of the blame for inflation on the Bank of Canada and its money printing, and I know that there was a lot of bristling from the Laurentian elites about this. And at the same time, if I look back to the Harper government, when you were finance minister and even when your predecessor, Jim Flaherty, was, I don't recall really any public acrimony between the government and the bank. And I was wanting to get your thoughts on is that appropriate, the criticism that was directed there? And what are the implications of that? How much blame does that institution actually have for what's happened?
Well, we respected the independence of the monetary authority of the Bank of Canada, but on the other hand, we weren't fighting with fiscal policy wasn't fighting monetary policy, and vice versa. We were trying to, we're moving in the same direction. Now we have fiscal policy which has thrown a huge burden on the Bank of Canada, and which can't shoulder it all on its own. And of course, you hear from the governor and the deputy governors about, now's the time to break the glass because we've got a productivity problem. We have a debt problem. And the bank will independently decide based on data when it's time to start reducing rates. They'll be looking at the inflation numbers. I suspect they're going to start reducing rates, fairly soon, maybe even within a couple of months. But there are implications to that. There's affordability, but there's also the impact on the dollar if the Fed doesn't reduce rates as well. So it's quite complex. The Prime Minister doesn't spend much time apparently thinking about monetary policy, and we know what he's done with fiscal policy. So it's a ground zero so far. But I'm not going to give advice to the monetary authority, but I think the government keeps its distance, but ultimately it's responsible.
So explain to me where a lot of this is going, because I remember when the Bank of Canada said inflation was going to be transitory, and then we learned it was something that would get quite severe, and even if it's cooled a little bit, it's still affecting people. And then you have fiscal policy that is exacerbating affordability problems such as carbon taxes and so on. But if we look forward, and I wouldn't say that this has been an entire elephant in the room, some people have talked about it. Canadians who have to renew their mortgages within the next 1, 2, 3 years are in for a rude awakening. And I wonder where this goes.
Well, let me just refer back to Pierre Poilievre's frustration, I guess, with monetary policy. And it goes back to a hearing in the House when he was questioning the governor, and he said Pierre felt that we've got an inflation problem that's there and growing, and the governor said, well, it's transitory. It turned out Pierre was right and the governor was wrong, and the governor admitted he was wrong. So it was frustrating for Pierre, who wanted the bank to move in the interest of the economy and everyday citizens. Well, I think data has sort of moved the bank, and now you're mentioning some of the critical affordability issues. I mean, we know housing is really in crisis at this moment, and a dream has been quashed for people wanting to buy their first home. And there's a lot of fear in the air because some of these mortgages are coming due. I think there's going to be a lot of political push on the bank to move, but it will move when it thinks it's appropriate. But I think it will move this year, and I think things will start to get a bit better on the interest rate side.
I wanted to move to a very different issue, but one that I know is near and dear to your heart, which is Israel, and I think in general the threats facing the Jewish community in this country, of which you're a member. And I wanted to ask about whether you saw what's happening coming before, because I think anti-Semitism, as many people have said, has not emerged, it's been exposed. I think it's always been there, and people are being a lot more brazen with it. But we've now seen the targeting of Jewish businesses, of Jewish neighborhoods. It's not just, protesting at the Israeli consulate or embassy, which I'd say is a legitimate place to protest. It's protesting Jewish people. And is this something that you foresaw in this country?
Well, I knew it was always a potential, and I just want to say that here at this conference at the Canada Strong and Free, I've been very heartened, but not in the least surprised by the terrific support for Israel and for the Jewish people, and the remarks that our leader Pierre Poilievre made about the Jewish community in Canada, and how we he stands with, and we all stand with all our friends and neighbors. So. This isn't all a dark story, but Anti-Semitism has been a constant for thousands of years. You can analyze why and what the rationale or rationalizations for it, but it always seems to be there lurking. And what is perhaps new is that it's no longer just a phenomenon of the far right. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's less of a problem in the far right because they've been so marginalized. They're not less hateful. I'm not suggesting that, but they're not as big a threat. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, in the left, the new postmodernism, intersectionality, critical race theory, the assignment of people to two categories of oppressed and oppressors has worked against the Jewish community, which maybe wasn't viewed as an exemplar of whiteness, is now, we're all together in this, Andrew, and so Israel is being judged in that context, and it's been an opportunity, frankly, for some of this ugliness to come out of the sewer and onto the streets of this country, and that's worrying and a blight. Frankly.
And I would take what you've said there and add to it by pointing out that this exists in the far right. It exists in the mainstream left. And this is the challenge, is that you don't actually need to go to the fringes of the left to find a lot of this venom against Jews. And that has been...
No, you'll find it in the universities.
Yes.
Mainstream.
Well, you'll find it in caucus. I mean, you'll find it in the NDP caucus and to some extent in the Liberal caucus as well.
Yeah. It's a deep concern, and I think, we hope that our friends and neighbors will see it as not only a threat to a community, a minority community, but really a threat to Canadian values, an assault on Canadian values, and a threat to the type of country we want to see Canada continue to be.
Joe Oliver, always a pleasure, sir.
Great to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.